All right. So first, by way of just definitions, so we know, what nomenclature we'll use moving forward. Um, when we talk about Pan-African nationalism or Pan-Africanism, um, we have two types. One is continental, that is based mainly on the continent and its outlying islands. The thought and practice directed towards the liberation and unity of the African continent. And this definition is coming from Maulana Karenga's Intro to Black Studies text. And then he says the second type of Pan-African nationalism is global, and it's thought and practice directed toward the liberation, unity, and mutual support of African people throughout the world. Now, this just connects the African continent to the diaspora. So this is for those Africans living in the United States, in Brazil, which actually has the largest population of Africans outside of Africa is in Brazil. All the Africans in Canada and the Caribbean and the UK. That's the global context of Pan Africanism. All right. Moving forward, so what is this idea of Black nationalism? And Karenga, again, from the Intro to Black Studies text, says it's the social thought and practice centered in the concept and conviction that African Americans are a distinct people with a distinct personality, and they have the right and responsibility to unite in order to gain the structural capacity to define, defend, and develop their own interests. All right. Now, this is a very specific type of ideology because it's based on African Americans and their struggle, their particular struggle that we've had in this country. So Black nationalism might not necessarily translate well in a continental African sense because most people there are already Black. So it takes on a different tone and texture once this ideology spreads throughout the world. And I wanted to put that out there to provide different context of the diversity of African thought, when it comes to how we function as a collective of both, in a global context, in a more specific context, where we're talking about the United States or Brazil or somewhere on the continent. Again, this definition is region specific and does not necessarily include the interests of African people and other nations. And that's what I was just saying. The definition is also based on racial consciousness, not cultural consciousness. And that is extremely important point, that to understand yourself from a quote unquote Black point of view, whether as opposed to an African point of view, kind of reduces the person to their color identity rather than their cultural identity. And as we move along in this course, and with Osiri University, cultural consciousness is, I think, our primary objective rather than simply a racial consciousness. Excuse me. John Henry Clark speaks to this point. He says it's time for Black people to stop playing the separation game of geography, of where the slave ship put us down. We must instead concentrate on where the slave ship picked us up. And again, this is specifically speaking to those Africans in the diaspora who may have a more of a color consciousness or even a nationalistic consciousness, being if you're Jamaican or Dominican or Brazilian, and base it more on the cultural context. All right. And he argues that when we speak about Black people, wherever they are in the world, their name must reflect three things: land, history, and culture. And again, he argues that Black people, when Black people call themselves Black, it tells people what you look like, but it doesn't necessarily tell you who you are. All right. And again, we want to focus away from, just the surface understanding of what it means to be African to a more cultural context. All right. Just to, put it in context, I'm light skinned. So anyone in the world, I can be seen as, brown skin. I can easily blend into a number of different contexts just based on skin color. But my cultural consciousness is African. And that's the point that John Henrik Clarke was trying to get to, that we need to focus on land history and culture rather than the pure aesthetics of our skin color. So just wanted to give a few more understandings of what Pan-Africanism means. Dr. E.B. Du Bois, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, argued that the Pan-African movement is an aid to the promotion of national self-determination among Africans under African leadership and for the benefit of Africans themselves. And I think this argument comes out of his participation in developing the African Union back in the early 20th century. So he's speaking from a very nationalistic point of view. And again, there's no judgment either way. I'm just giving you a different context of how we understand Pan-Africanism and Pan-African nationalism. Next one, Peter Esadike argues that Pan-Africanism is a political and cultural phenomenon which regards Africa, Africans, and their descendants abroad as a unit. And again, this is more of a global Pan-African perspective that Esadike provides. Again, to Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who argues that Pan-Africanism is about the restoration of African people to their proper place in world history, to facilitate and bring about the ingathering of African people throughout the world, and to restore what slavery, and colonialism took away. All right. Now, John Henrik Clarke, being a historian, is very focused on, rebuilding this history of African people, and so we can be at the table of respect when we speak about how the world is and how we are going to be moving forward. Dr. Emerson argues that the sense that all Africans have a spiritual affinity with each other, and that having suffered together in the past, slavery, colonialism, they must march together into a new and brighter future. In its fullest realization, it would involve the creation of an African Leviathan in the form of a political organization and association of states. It might also involve an almost infinite variety of regional groupings and collaborative arrangements, which are partial embodiments of the counter-embracing unity, which is the dream of true Pan-African, the true Pan-Africa. All right, and he's speaking more on developing a concrete um, um, uh, coalition of African people on the continent and throughout the world. All right, moving forward. So the text that I will focus on today, and this is the text that I sent to the class, comes from Kwame Nantambu. It's Pan-Africanism versus Pan-African nationalism and Afrocentric analysis. And I wanted to provide, because I like the way he breaks down the different historical facets of Pan-Africanism and attempts to, give the long view of what Pan-Africanism may mean. So he argues that Pan-African nationalism is the nationalistic, unified struggle resistance of African people against all forms of foreign aggression and invasion in the fight or nationhood or nation building. The primary goal of Pan-African nationalism is the total liberation and unification of all African people under African communalism. Pan-African nationalism seeks to achieve African nationhood and nationality, human perfectibility based on several cardinal principles slash virtues of Mayat. And we talked about Mayat a little bit yesterday with my other class, and that Mayat is self-reliance, self-determination, seven cardinal virtues of Mayat, excuse me, self-reliance, self-determination, the creation of Pan-African national solidarity, and the confraternity of among all African people on the continent and in the diaspora. A cooperative, humanistic, and communal value system, spirituality, and traditional extended family um, modus vivendi, and polycentrism. All right, so he's trying to give a large definition of what it means to be Pan African and move towards a sense of Pan African nationalism. And it is a large undertaking, right? We're talking about working to align over 1 billion people spread throughout the globe. All right, so the idea of Pan Africanism is a large and extremely daunting idea, but I argue as we move along that this idea is worth fighting for.